y'all, welcome back to Holler House. Please make sure to like the video if you enjoy it, and we always appreciate if you decide to subscribe. So this video is just walking through our process of canning deer meat. Deer is our primary meat source. We usually get at least 4 or 5 deer each season. That gives us enough to put up for ourselves, the two of us, and then also when we're entertaining family and friends, and it also gives us the ability to give some meat away as well to our loved ones. And you can see here he's going through and just cleaning up a little bit more. This meat was mostly already cut up, but he's just going through and cutting a little bit of extra things off that he doesn't really like the look of. But you can see there's still some fat silver skin on this meat here. We're not real big sticklers on all of that having to be off. And just my personal preference and opinion on deer meat, what you're seeing here that he's got in these jars, you can see it's not all red. There is some of that silver skin. There's a little bit of, touch of fat here and there. For me, that doesn't put any kind of off flavor into the meat. I think some people say that it does, but I've never noticed that. The only time I've had any deer meat that I would consider tasted gamey, where it just had a real strong taste to it, that wasn't super pleasant, was having deer meat from somebody who just wasn't super skilled in the initial processing of a deer. And when I say that, I'm talking about leaving glands in the meat, that some people can sometimes overlook when they're new at, processing or that initial processing of a deer. And as you can see here, he's just continuing to clean and put that meat in those jars. We didn't have any quart jars at the time, so we were using pint jars. We need to wash up some of our quart jars. We already had these inside, so we'll just use these. And he's just packing this is a cold pack method, so the jars are clean. We didn't heat the jars up in this situation. I know some people do that. Everybody does things a little bit differently. You have to make those choices for yourself. But we just used, cool, clean jars, cold meat, and back there our pressure canner that we've got on the stove, there's cold water in that too, so we're going to let it all come to temperature together, the water and the jars. That's just a big thing. You don't want to shock those jars and bust them by having 2 different temperatures between the 2 of them. And what he's doing here is just trying to remove any kind of air that might be trapped between the meat. He packed those jars very tight. I think you want to pack your jars tight, not too tight, because you can get some siphoning. We got a little bit of siphoning on one of our jars, which I'm not super stressed about it. It happens sometimes. And so I'm using these pint jars here, and I'm just putting a half teaspoon of salt in each of the jars. You don't have to put salt in them. I just prefer to put a little bit of salt at the beginning, but it's not a requirement when you're pressure canning here. And then we have some habanero. We like to grow habanero in our garden, and I like to dry it. It's really great when pickle time comes around, when it's time to make pickles and put up pickles, if you like spicy pickles, because that's kind of one of the things that I've found. One of the only things that I've found that can really make my pickles spicy is those dried habaneros. And with canning deer meat, you do want to have an inch of head space. You can see we kind of cheated a little bit here, maybe have a little bit too filled, but you do ideally want to have an inch between the top of your product there and the edge of that rim on the jar. So here we're just cleaning the rims of those jars with a wet paper towel. I know some people use vinegar. Just use water on a paper towel. You just don't want that to be nasty and greasy or have things that can get stuck between that rim and your seal on your jar lids. So you want to make sure that's clean. And we're just putting some jar lids on top there. We don't heat them or anything like that. I do like to keep them in water. I just feel like that seems to probably make for a better seal. And then here you just put your band lids on, you screw them finger tight. So here we're just loading those pint jars into the canner. We've got 3 ounces of water there. There's some measurements on the inside of our canner that shows us where that water line needs to be. And we actually ended up putting 8 pints in there. We just don't have the last one on film. We just didn't have enough meat for that one jar, so we just put some potatoes on top of it. And so here we're just putting that lid on the pressure canner and securing it, and you'll see that little, I don't know what it's called, it looks like a little button in the front. That after some time will pop up, and then you want to see steam coming out of that air vent there. I try to give it at least 10 minutes, and then I'll put that weight on. So with my elevation and the type of pressure canner I have, I'm shooting for 11 pounds of pressure on that gauge. So when I reach that 11 pounds of pressure, that's when I'm going to time 75 minutes for my pint jars. Got to keep it at that 11 pounds. Once that time's up, I'm going to take the pressure canner off of the hot burner. And I'm going to let it just sit there and cool until that button pops down and the pressure drops down below 0. And then I'll take that weight off when there's no pressure left and let that sit for at least 10 minutes. Then we'll take off the lid. And also you want to be very careful here. Make sure you wear some oven mitts maybe, because you can see here the steam got him. And so even here you can just let those jars actually sit even a little bit longer, 5 minutes or so, before you take them out of the canner. You can see what time it is on our oven. It was 9:52, so we were just kind of ready to be done with it for the night. And here's the finished product. We leave those rings on while they're cooling down and make sure to take them off before storing. Here's some of that canned meat with potatoes, and you can just see how tender that deer meat is.